Hello, my name's Nick Norby, and I'm the host of History Up in Smoke, Cigar Chat of classical icons where I discuss individuals from all epochs of history. In this installment, I'm going to be talking about and discussing perhaps the greatest military general in all of human history, Hannibal of Carthage, who, during the Second Punic War against Rome, almost single-handedly decimated the entirety of Rome's armies. And had he taken over Italy, he would have changed and altered the trajectory of human history as we know it. But before we discuss Hannibal any further, let's go grab a cigar. Welcome back, everybody, to my third installment on Hannibal, a Glorious Failure. And if you were paying close attention, you can see my cigar grew. Actually, I had to go get a new one. The other one was actually burning down pretty close to the band, and I started scratching my head a little bit, and I was like, there's no way that I'm going to get through these last two battles and be able to have a cigar. So I put that one out and I went and got a new one, cut it. The draw is flawless, a little bit better than the previous one, which was super loose, but the flavors are just perfect. They're identical. It's got like a nice little sweet note to it. The smoke that it's giving off is just very robust. A lot of smoke output from this baby. Probably a little bit more difficult to pick up on the camera, but it's definitely giving off a lot of smoke. And it does have that nice sweetness to it, and like I said, that aroma from the smoke is just very nice. But I wanted to continue our discussion on Hannibal, and a couple things that I want to talk about before we discuss the battle at Lake Trasimene, and that is in the spring of 2000. I always want to say 2017 for some reason. That'd be, a couple thousand years off or a little bit more. In about 217 BC, Hannibal and his army were crossing the swampy marshes of northern Italy. And during this journey, Hannibal actually contracted some type of acute eye disorder where he just had all sorts of disturbances in his eye. Now, of course, it's impossible to diagnose where or how or what the cause of this came from, but nonetheless, it actually caused permanent damage to his eye where he lost 100% of all of his vision in one of his eyes. So you would think that would be quite a handicap for an individual that is in battle like this. And of course, modern historians, they sort of like to try and play the game of, what caused it, so on and so forth. And there's a wide range of speculations as to what it may have been. Could have been conjunctivitis, uveitis. I actually had uveitis from reactive arthritis, where it does affect your eye, and if you don't get treatment on it, it can potentially cause blindness. Okay, well, we're talking several thousand plus years ago. And this guy was in a rush to get his army in preparation for their next encounter with the Romans, so he had no time to stop. So he sought no medical treatment, but both historians, Livy and Polybius, tell us that Hannibal just kept pressing on to get his army in position for the next Roman opponent that he would encounter, and that was Flaminius. He was the consul that was actually put in charge of the Roman army after Hannibal had decimated the Romans prior to that at Trebia. But Flaminius was a very destructive individual. He refused to take any type of direction from his subordinates, and part of this was because they made the suggestion that he doesn't attack and pursue Hannibal right out of the gate. And this was sort of a unanimous idea amongst many of his, like I said, subordinates, so on and so forth. But he wanted to pursue Hannibal and get at him as soon as humanly possible. And they did. He got his army set up to go. But there was a couple of what the ancients called bad omens that took place right before they left. And these were sort of signals to them that this wasn't going to turn out good. Now, to a modern you're not going to probably think too much of this, but one of them was right before Flaminius was getting ready to lead his troops out to battle and start the lead, his horse reared, knocked him right off the horse. And this took all the soldiers and people back. When stuff like that happened, it wasn't a good sign. There was also a courier that arrived with a letter from another one of the consuls suggesting that Flaminius wait and not attack Hannibal and his army. Well, Flaminius said, do you have any other letters inside of your pockets? And the courier said, no, I don't. And he said, is there any word from the Roman Senate suggesting that I'm not in charge and that I shouldn't pursue Hannibal? And he said, no, there wasn't. He laughed, sneered at the courier, took his army, and started pursuing Hannibal because he was desperate to get revenge and avenge the losses from the other Roman armies that had fell. But Hannibal was anticipating a lot of this, and he himself was actually preparing a trap at this time. I have a little draw of this because we got a lot of cigar. But again, we see the military genius of Hannibal on full display because he knew Flaminius, like I said, was eager to attack him, and that he was going to do everything in his power to try and catch up with Hannibal and his men. But Hannibal also thought to himself, well, you know, I fooled the Romans a couple times. It's probably going to be a little bit more difficult to fool them this time. They're going to be expecting some type of trap to take place. So he set out for Lake Trasimene, which was just an absolutely perfect place for the next battle if you're Hannibal. And what he wanted to do was get the Romans to pursue him as fast as humanly possible, almost in a reckless manner. And what he did was, so Lake Trasimene sits down in a large valley. There is a huge sort of incline that goes up with a forest, rocks, all that stuff. And there's a path that runs right along the edge of the lake. Now, about 2,000 years ago, it ran right up to the edge of the lake. If you go there today, it's several hundred yards back because the water has receded so far. But during the time of the battle, there was a narrow path that men could only probably be about 4 abreast and actually walk. Well, Flaminius had, I believe, roughly about 25,000 or so men under his command. And as they approached Lake Trasimene, he looked off into the distance. Down up out of the valley, it was evening, and there were fires lit everywhere, hundreds of fires. And he thought to himself, I've got Hannibal on the run. I'm going to get him. He had no idea what was about to happen. So they set up a base of camp. And the next morning, bright and early, Flaminius and his men began to pursue who they thought was Hannibal and his army as they were slowly moving away. I mean, the fires were still giving off smoke. They were still lit. So they're moving, like I said, almost in a reckless manner. But he had absolutely no inclination that Hannibal had strategically taken 35,000 of his men that were under his command. Most of them didn't even speak the same language. There were people from, again, all over the world fighting with him. But he strategically placed them within 20 to 30 feet as the Romans began to march by. And they were completely oblivious that Hannibal and the Carthaginian army was standing right there and they were poised to attack. Well, suddenly, Hannibal gave the signal, and out of the woods and every nook and cranny, they exploded out, and before the Romans could even draw their swords, they were being cut into pieces by Hannibal and his men. It was an absolute devastating, wrecking ball battle that was taking place. And I've often said this too. I was actually talking to a friend of mine at work today. When battles like this happen, where you have 70, 80, 90, 100,000 plus people involved, all clashing simultaneously at the same time. Could you imagine what that sounds like? When swords are just clanging off shields, the dust is being kicked up, the horses making the sounds, the human beings that are being slain, and they're crying, and just, I mean, it would be an absolutely horrific sight to see. But this is the way they fought battles in antiquity. This is the way they conducted themselves. And they fought for glory and they fought for honor. So, something else that, I'm gonna have a quick puff of this before it goes out again, because it's already almost going out. In fact, if you're smoking a cigar and you're kicking back and relaxing and listening to this, go ahead and enjoy yourself for a second. I'm gonna have a sip of my ginger ale, which I dropped on the way here, and I don't know if you can see that. But yeah, nonetheless, I had a very difficult time opening the can. Hopefully it doesn't spill all over me. I have one more little puff here, if you guys don't mind. During the chaos of this battle, Polybius tells us that there were some Gauls that were fighting for Hannibal and the Carthaginians. And 2 years prior to that, Flaminius, who was leading the Romans, had attacked many of their cities, their towns, killing and slaying their men, women, and children. You gotta remember, the Romans, don't feel sorry for them. They were probably among the most destructive, ruthless people in the world. Anyways, there was an individual, I can't recall his name off the top of my head, I do apologize for that. He spotted Flaminius in the midst of the battle. He recognized him by his armor. And he was surrounded, Flaminius was surrounded by some of his bodyguards. Well, this individual called several of his friends that were from Gaul as well, and they put a radar fix on Flaminius. They wanted to get him. And they were literally cutting their way through the other, resistance that the Romans were putting up. Finally, they got up to Flaminius, to his bodyguards that were surrounding him, and they took out his bodyguards, and then this individual took his lance and shot it right through the rib cage of Flaminius, and he fell and died. At that point in time, their leader had been taken out, and the armies were scattering in any and every direction they could to just stay alive. Remember, I said that path was right there on the lake? Hundreds and thousands of Romans jumped into that lake and tried swimming away. They had armor on. They sunk very quickly and drowned to their deaths, and the ones that didn't were cut down by the Carthaginians. After the battle ended, the Romans, who started out with 25,000 men, had lost 15,000 in that battle. Now, Hannibal was an honorable man when he defeated an army, and he had found out that Flaminius had been slain during the battle, and he sent his men out looking for Flaminius to give him a proper burial. But they couldn't find his body, and they couldn't find his armor. It was a devastating defeat, to say the least, for the Romans at the Battle of Trebia. Now, Hannibal had a nice victory. Was this a great victory in military history? Not necessarily by the sheer, what he did, as far as, how many people were killed, so on and so forth. I mean, that's always bad. But what made him great about this battle was his ability to ambush the Romans, and the Romans have no idea what was happening. Of course, ambushes happen all the time in military. If you look in the annals of military history, ambushes they're replete with them. But what was interesting about this, when you see, when there's ambushes in recorded history, it might be like a dozen or 24 people, not 35,000. Hannibal had this unique sense to, number one, have his men's trust, but number two, to keep them under control and silent. And when he gave the signal, they obeyed and they did what he said. So this was, like I said, just an absolutely devastating defeat for the Romans. Now they were a little bit concerned because those that survived went back home and Rome was up in arms. They did not know what to do at this point in time. So what they're doing now is they're gearing up several armies to come at Hannibal and get him out of the history books. So when I come back after a little bit of this, we're going to talk about the major proclamation, the battle that really put Hannibal on the map, and that was in Quai, Italy. We'll talk about that when I get back.